It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon, and I was finally enjoying a rare moment of peace at home. My husband was out of town on a business trip, and my stepdaughter, Emma, had gone to visit her mother for the weekend. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I settled on the couch with a cup of tea and a book, savoring the stillness. Little did I know, my peaceful afternoon was about to take a surprising turn. Just as I flipped to the next chapter, the sound of a knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting company, and we rarely got visitors unannounced. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I should answer. But curiosity got the better of me, and I made my way to the door. When I opened it, standing on the porch was someone I wasn't expecting to see. Emma's boyfriend, Ryan. Ryan was polite enough when we'd met a few times in the past, but we'd never had much interaction beyond casual greetings. So, seeing him at my doorstep, especially when Emma wasn't even home, caught me completely off guard. "Hi, Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice steady but his expression slightly tense. "Sorry to drop by like this, but I really needed to talk to you, alone." I blinked, unsure how to respond. What could he possibly need to talk to me about? And why now, of all times? 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind as I stepped aside to let him in, still trying to process the unexpected visit. Ryan's eyes darted around the living room as he walked in, like he was searching for something, or maybe making sure no one else was there. The air felt heavier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something serious was about to unfold. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck, and then looked me straight in the eyes. "Mrs. Harper," he began, his voice low and almost shaky. "I don't know how to say this, but I think you need to know the truth." And just like that, my heart sank. What truth? What could he possibly have to tell me that was so urgent? I braced myself, knowing this conversation was about to change everything. Ryan's words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I motioned for him to sit down, though I couldn't shake the nervous energy bubbling up inside me. He sat on the edge of the couch, leaning forward with his hands clasped tightly together. It was clear that whatever he was about to say wasn't easy for him. "Ryan," I said cautiously, trying to steady my voice, "what's going on? Does this have something to do with Emma?" My mind raced with possibilities. Had they fought? Was he about to break her heart? Or was it something worse? The last thought sent a chill down my spine. He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. "It's about Emma. And me," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's more than that. It's complicated." I waited, giving him space to collect his thoughts. He let out a deep breath, running a hand through his hair before looking up at me. His eyes, usually confident and carefree, were now filled with an unease that made me feel even more unsettled. "I didn't know who else to talk to," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I care about Emma, a lot. But lately, there's been something happening. Things she's not telling you. Things I didn't even notice at first. And now, I feel like I'm caught in the middle of something I don't understand." His words didn't make sense to me. Emma wasn't the type to hide things, at least not from me. We had built a strong bond over the years, and she always came to me when something was wrong. But now I was questioning everything. "What do you mean? What kind of things?" I pressed, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Ryan hesitated, as if choosing his next words carefully. "It's hard to explain. There are moments when she's not herself, like she's distracted or hiding something. I thought maybe it was just stress from school or work, but it's more than that. And then," he paused, biting his lip, his expression conflicted. "There's someone else involved, someone she's been meeting." I froze. "What do you mean, someone else?" The words felt foreign in my mouth, and my heartbeat quickened. This didn't sound like Emma at all. Was Ryan mistaken? Or was there a part of her life I didn't know about? Ryan opened his mouth to answer, but then he stopped, his attention suddenly shifting to the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart jumped as I glanced toward the window. My husband wasn't supposed to be home, and Emma was hours away. So, who was it? Ryan's face turned pale, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "She's here." My stomach churned as the car door slammed shut outside. Ryan and I exchanged a tense glance, both frozen in place. "Who's here?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't answer. Instead, he shifted nervously, as though debating whether to stay or leave. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and my pulse quickened. Whoever was at the door wasn't in a hurry, but their presence felt deliberate. I could feel my breath hitch as a shadow moved past the living room window. Ryan sat stiffly on the couch, his face pale, and I realized he knew exactly who it was. Before I could ask anything else, there was another knock, firm and steady. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something told me this wasn't someone who would just walk away. Summoning what little courage I had, I stood up and motioned for Ryan to stay put. When I opened the door, I was met with a woman I didn't recognize. She looked to be in her mid-30s, well-dressed, but with a sharp, almost intimidating presence. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, and she smiled, though it didn't quite reach her face. "Mrs. Harper, I presume?" she said, her tone polite but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Yes," I replied cautiously, gripping the door tighter. "Can I help you?" She glanced past me, her eyes narrowing slightly as she spotted Ryan in the living room. "I believe you already have company," she said, stepping forward as though expecting me to let her in. I instinctively blocked the doorway, my unease growing by the second. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman's smile tightened. "I'm someone who's been trying to get answers," she said cryptically, "and I think Ryan here has a few he needs to share." Her gaze flicked back to him, sharp and accusing. Ryan stood abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and angry. It was the first time I'd seen him lose his composure, and it startled me. The woman tilted her head, unfazed by his reaction. "You made this my business, Ryan. Or should I say Emma did. She's been keeping secrets from everyone, hasn't she?" Her words cut through the room like a blade, and I could feel the tension thickening. My heart pounded as I looked between the two of them, trying to make sense of what was unfolding. What secrets? And how was this stranger connected to my stepdaughter? The answers felt just out of reach, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The air in the room felt electric, charged with tension and unanswered questions. I could feel my palms sweating as I stood there, caught between Ryan and this mysterious woman whose presence seemed to shift the entire atmosphere. Ryan's eyes darted toward me, a silent plea I couldn't yet understand. The woman, however, stood her ground, her sharp gaze pinning him in place like a predator to its prey. "I think it's time you told her," she said, her voice calm but filled with a quiet authority that sent shivers down my spine. "She deserves to know what's been going on. Or should I do it for you?" Ryan's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might explode, but instead he shook his head, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Not like this," he muttered, almost to himself. Then, turning to me, he finally spoke. "Mrs. Harper, I swear I didn't want you to find out this way. I came here today because I thought I could explain everything before it got out of hand." "Find out what?" I demanded, my voice rising in spite of myself. "What's going on, Ryan? What aren't you telling me?" My heart pounded as I searched his face for answers, but all I saw was guilt and hesitation. The woman let out a soft, almost mocking laugh. "You really haven't told her, have you?" she said, crossing her arms. "Typical, always waiting until it's too late." Ryan shot her a glare. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "This isn't your place." "Isn't it?" she countered, her voice rising slightly. "You dragged me into this, Ryan. Or did you forget? I know what Emma's been doing. I know why she's been sneaking around. And I know the mess you're both in." The room seemed to close in around me as her words sank in. Sneaking around? A mess? My chest tightened as I tried to process it all. "What is she talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What has Emma done?" Ryan opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the woman cut in. "Maybe you should ask her yourself," she said coldly, nodding toward the door. I turned, and my breath caught as I saw Emma standing there, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and something else, something that looked eerily like fear. The silence that followed was deafening, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us. Whatever was about to come out, it was clear this was the turning point, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her wide eyes flickering between Ryan, the woman, and me. It was as if she had walked in on a scene she wasn't prepared to face. I could see the panic in her expression, but there was something else, something darker, like she knew exactly what was happening, but had hoped this moment wouldn't come. The room felt suffocatingly quiet, every second stretching endlessly as we waited for someone to speak. "Emma," I said finally, my voice trembling as I took a small step toward her. "What's going on? Who is this woman, and what is she talking about?" My heart was racing, desperate for answers, yet dreading what they might be. Emma's lips parted as if she was about to say something, but then she stopped, her hands clenching at her sides. She looked at Ryan, almost pleadingly, but he shook his head, his expression weary and defeated. "Emma," he said quietly, "you can't keep running from this. She already knows too much." Emma's face flushed, her breathing quickening as the woman stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. "Oh, so now you want to come clean?" the woman said, her tone sharp. "Convenient considering how far this has already gone." "I didn't ask for your help," Emma snapped, her voice cracking with frustration. "You're the one who got involved when you shouldn't have." "Don't blame me for this," the woman shot back, crossing her arms. "You made your choices, Emma. All I did was follow the trail you left behind." The tension was unbearable, and I felt like I was watching something unravel before my very eyes. "What trail?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What are you all talking about? Someone needs to explain this right now." Emma turned to me, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's not what you think, okay? It's not." She hesitated, struggling to find the words, and then her gaze dropped to the floor. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "For what to happen?" I pressed, my frustration boiling over. "Emma, you're not making sense." And then, as if the room couldn't hold any more tension, the woman dropped the bombshell. "She's been lying to you," she said flatly, her eyes fixed on Emma. "And to you too, Ryan. Emma's been meeting with someone behind everyone's back, a man, and it's not just some casual thing. She's in way over her head, and now it's putting all of you at risk." The words hit me like a tidal wave, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. I turned to Emma, who looked as though she might collapse under the weight of what had just been revealed. "Is this true?" Emma's shoulders shook as she buried her face in her hands, her voice muffled but trembling. "I didn't know what else to do," she admitted. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out, but now it's too late." Ryan looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "Who is he, Emma?" he asked, his voice raw. "Who have you been meeting?" Emma hesitated, her silence stretching unbearably. Then, just as she opened her mouth to answer, there was a loud bang at the front door, startling all of us. The sound reverberated through the house, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Whoever was on the other side wasn't knocking anymore. They were pounding, and it sounded urgent. "Don't answer it," the woman said quickly, her voice low and serious. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her expression, and it sent a chill down my spine. But before anyone could move, the banging came again, louder this time, and a deep voice shouted through the door, "Open up! We know you're in there!" The room erupted into chaos. Emma stepped back, shaking her head frantically. "No," she whispered. "This can't be happening." Ryan stood, moving toward her protectively, while the woman grabbed my arm, her grip firm. "Whatever you do," she said in a hushed but urgent tone, "don't let them in." My mind raced as the pounding continued, each knock echoing like a countdown to something inevitable. Whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't going to leave, and somehow I knew this was only the beginning of whatever nightmare we had stumbled into. The pounding on the door was relentless, each thud louder than the last, shaking the walls of the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned toward the woman, who looked more frightened than I had seen her all evening. "What's going on? Who's out there?" I asked, my voice shaky but desperate for answers. She glanced at the door, her eyes wide with panic, before her gaze flicked back to me. "You need to trust me," she said urgently. "Do not open that door. Whoever's out there, it's not who you think." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I turned to Emma, who was trembling, her eyes locked on the door, clearly torn between fear and guilt. Ryan, standing protectively in front of her, looked ready to charge toward the door himself, but something in the woman's tone kept him frozen. "What's happening, Emma?" I asked, my voice a whisper as I stepped closer to her. "Who is this man? Who's trying to break in?" Emma finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I never wanted any of this," she murmured. "It started with small lies, things I thought wouldn't matter. But I got too deep, and now it's all falling apart." The pounding on the door grew louder, the sound vibrating through the floorboards, as if whoever was outside was determined to get in at any cost. I turned back to the woman, whose gaze had become even more frantic. "You need to tell me what's going on, now," I demanded. The tension in the room was suffocating, and I couldn't stand not knowing any longer. She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a piercing intensity. "You're in danger," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The man outside is connected to Emma's secret, but it's not just about her. It's about you, too. This isn't about betrayal or a simple affair. It's much darker than that." I felt a chill run down my spine as my mind tried to process her words. "What do you mean? What is he after?" Before she could answer, there was a sudden crash, and the door burst open with force. The man outside stormed in, his dark figure blocking the doorway. His eyes locked on Emma, and everything seemed to freeze for a moment. "Emma," he said, his voice cold and familiar, "you thought you could hide? Now it's time to finish what we started." I stood frozen, not fully understanding what was unfolding. But then something happened, a sudden shift. The woman beside me rushed forward, pushing past Ryan and Emma. In a swift motion, she pulled a gun from her coat, aiming it directly at the man who had just entered. "Not so fast," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes were filled with something else, anger, fear, maybe even regret. You won't get her this time. The man didn't flinch, but a grin spread across his face. You think you can stop this, Diana? You're too late. My head was spinning. Diana? The woman who had been standing there, causing chaos, was somehow tied to all of this, and her connection to the man in front of us was far more complicated than I could have ever imagined. As the standoff continued, I realized one thing. The truth was still unraveling, but now I was trapped in the middle of something far bigger than I could have ever anticipated. And just when I thought I could finally understand what was going on, another bombshell dropped. Diana's not here to save you, the man said with a sinister chuckle. She's the one who put the target on your back in the first place. The room seemed to stop spinning as Diana's words hung in the air. I blinked, trying to process what she had just said. The man's smirk widened as he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. My mind raced, but before I could speak, Diana's voice cut through the tension. I never wanted this, she said, her voice shaky now, betraying the mask of control she'd worn all evening. But when Emma got involved, there was no going back. Emma looked between the two of them, her face pale, her hands trembling. What are you talking about? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Diana lowered the gun slightly, but didn't let her guard down. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Emma. I thought I could handle it on my own. But when you started looking into things you shouldn't have, it got dangerous. And now, she added, her voice faltering, now everything's unraveling. The man, still standing in the doorway, let out a bitter laugh. You think you can stop this? It's already too late. His eyes locked onto Emma's. Your mother's involvement in all of this was just the beginning. Now, you'll see how deep it goes. I could see the horror dawning on Emma's face as she pieced together the fragments of the puzzle. What did you do, Diana? She asked, her voice cracking. Diana didn't answer immediately. Instead, she seemed to take a deep breath, gathering herself. I worked with him, okay? I was part of it. I helped bring it all together, but I never wanted it to go this far. But when Emma started poking around, asking the wrong questions, things escalated. The man stepped forward, his face hardening. This is your fault, Diana. If you had just stayed quiet, none of this would have happened. But you had to play hero. I looked at the scene in front of me, the web of lies and deceit finally starting to make sense. Emma had been caught in something far bigger than I could have ever imagined. The man, who had been pulling the strings from the shadows, had used her as a pawn in whatever game they were playing. Diana, who I had thought was an ally, was just as tangled in this mess, and the dangerous truth was spilling out now, piece by piece. Everything's been about control, Diana said softly, her voice thick with regret. Control over Emma, control over what she knew, and control over what you, she turned to me, were going to find out. In the silence that followed, the gravity of everything hit me like a wave. But in that moment, I also realized something. No matter how dark the truth was, I had to face it, and so did Emma. The past couldn't be undone, but the future was still ours to decide. The man turned to leave, his eyes narrowing with finality. This isn't over, he warned. We'll be watching. As he stepped into the night, the door slammed shut behind him. Diana stood still for a moment, her breath shaky. Then she turned to face us, her expression now softer, almost vulnerable. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant to drag you into this, but now it's over. You're safe. Emma looked at her, her eyes filled with confusion, but also something deeper, an understanding that the real battle had only just begun. But for tonight, it was enough. We had made it through. And with time, Maybe we'd learn how to rebuild from the wreckage of the secrets that had nearly torn us apart. The shadows of the past still lingered, but for the first time, I felt like we were finally standing in the light. The door closed behind us, and we walked into the unknown. But I knew one thing. This story wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning.